now.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and one of the biggest stars of the North Carolina Republican Party is in very hot water tonight. After an interview he gave to Politico, Thom Tillis, North Carolina's Republican Speaker of the House, is the establishment-backed candidate to take on Democratic incumbent Senator Kay Hagan in her quest for re-election next year. Tillis told Politico that he thinks, quote, "For the most part, what I see from the folks who are opposing our agenda is whining coming from losers." North Carolina has perhaps the most aggressive right-wing government in America at the moment, thanks to a Republican governor, state house, and Senate that have ran through a voter ID law that prompted a Justice Department lawsuit, passed and signed into law a restrictive anti-abortion bill, passed a tax plan redistributing wealth to the rich, and cut education by $500 million. The hard right shift sparked a movement called Moral Mondays, in which the people that Tillis deems losers made their opposition known on a weekly basis. It has also led to a collapse in the approval rating of North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory and the GOP-controlled state legislature, while providing a boost to Democrat Kay Hagan in her quest for re-election to the Senate. But this is a story that is about more than just one North Carolina Republican's intemperate comments, because the attitude embedded in his comments extends far beyond his state's borders.
There are 47% of the people who will vote for the president no matter what. All right, there are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they are victims, who believe that government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it. But that's an entitlement, and the government should give it to them.
To many, that was the moment that lost Mitt Romney the 2012 election.
Damage control, Mitt Romney fighting back over that secretly recorded videotape and what he said about the 47%.
And if it wasn't that gaffe that cost Mitt Romney the election, the belief that the country is divided into virtuous, productive makers up against the lazy, vicious takers. And that's where Romney's running mate comes in.
Right now, about 60% of the American people get more in dollar value from the federal government than they pay back in taxes. We're coming to a country where we're getting more and more takers than makers in America. We could become a society where the net majority of Americans are takers, not makers.
We could quickly become a country of a net majority of takers versus makers.
A majority of takers versus makers.
Takers versus makers.
We're on this tipping point where more and more people are becoming net takers than makers in America. It's a function of the tipping point of more and more people becoming takers versus makers in America.
But those weren't just slip-ups. Those were the two most powerful Republicans at the time, expressing what has become the central tenet of modern conservatism.
We're throwing the handouts out.
Basically, two classes: victims, that is, taxpayers, productive people, and parasites.
The moocher class out there.
There are 50% of the voting public who want stuff. They want things. And who is going to give them things?
Remember, the rant that launched the Tea Party, that gave us our current political mess, wasn't about big banks or government waste. It was about foreclosure victims.
The government is promoting bad behavior.
The battle hymn of the Tea Party movement was specifically about the government bailing out the, quote, losers.
How about this, President and new administration? Why don't you put up a website to have people vote on the internet as a referendum to see if we really want to subsidize the losers' mortgages?
But you see, the conservative movement is strongest politically when it manages to convince average working Americans that it's actually on their side.
The biggest divide we have in this country is between entrenched politicians in Washington of both parties and the American people.
Conservatism is at its most effective, at its most populist. But during the Obama era, we've seen a movement increasingly convinced that it might not be of a majority of Americans, that maybe, just maybe, it represents a dwindling minority of hardworking Americans against a sea of lazy, welfare-seeking masses.
Mr. President, I don't oppose your plans because I want to protect the rich. I oppose your plans because I want to protect my neighbors. Hardworking, middle-class Americans who don't need us to come up with a plan to grow the government. They need a plan to grow the middle class.
And the contempt and cruelty of that message has real policy implications, like kicking 1.3 million people off of unemployment insurance for no reason, rejecting the Medicaid expansion, denying health insurance to nearly 5 million people just out of spite, cutting $40 billion from the food stamp program, kicking an estimated 5 million people, including children, elderly, disabled, and working people off the program without skipping a beat. The modern Republican Party is one that is convinced in its deep, dark heart that it does not represent the majority of Americans. And it is quickly becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Joining me now is Josh Barrow, politics editor for Business Insider. Josh, I really think that